This is an explanation of Controlled English and the Controlled English store, known as CE and the CE store, as available on GitHub. So I've loaded up a copy of the CE store, and you can see the user interface on the screen. It is composed of three sections. There's a section on the left with an accordion pane with various different functions that I'll talk through. There's a central work area which will display various pieces of information in a tabbed fashion, and there is a right hand pane where we can see more information, again in an accordion pane style, so we can get to various different parts of the interface. The interface is a research level interface that's essentially just designed to drive the REST APIs that the CE store provides. So it's not designed to look pretty, but it is functional in terms of its ability to be able to exercise those REST APIs that are available in the store. So the first thing I want to show is that we have an empty Controlled English store. And by empty, I mean that we do have some concepts defined in our model, and these are the default concepts that come essentially out of the box with the store when you first load it. That is really just to acknowledge that whilst we can build any ontology that we wish with this particular technology, we still need to be able to route the concepts that we're creating onto a root object, if you like. So we talk about a semantic knowledge graph, or a model, or an ontology, or a conceptual hierarchy, however you like to kind of think of it. But I think the term that does best describe it is a graph. So we do have a root concept, which is this thing object or concept, which all top level concepts inherit from. But we do create a graph, which means that all concepts can be linked together in a sort of any number of different ways, be it uni or bidirectional. So the first thing that I'm going to do is jump out to a text document where I've actually written some Controlled English sentences, and I'll talk through those, and then we'll put them into the store and see how they work. So this is a document containing Controlled English. And we can see that I have any sentences starting with a double dash or comment lines. So I've put a copyright statement at the top, and we've got some header information to tell us what this model's about. And then we've got some CE sentences written underneath. So I'll scroll down and talk through those. First of all, we've got what we call model sentences, and these are the sentences that we use to create our ontology. And as I said, I can use the term ontology, or I can use model, or semantic knowledge graph, and I tend to use all of those terms interchangeably. So in order to create our model, we use conceptualized statements, or the conceptualized word, and we can write various different conceptualized statements in order to build up our model. So here I've created a country, which I've just given a variable name C. The variable names don't really matter very much, and certainly they can be repeated throughout various different sentences. So the second concept that I'm creating is a person concept, which you can see is a little bit more complicated than the country concept, as it has some properties associated with it. So here I've created a couple of different property types. I've created a property string, which is email address. So we've conceptualized a person that has a value as an email address, so that would be a string value. But we can also link the person concept to other concepts that we either have defined already or that we will define later, or indeed might get implicitly defined as well. So in this instance, we've got a person that has an email address, and the person can work for, or work in, sorry, a particular country. They can be from a particular country, so that links the person to the country concept, but they can also work for a company, which will link that person to the company concept that we will define in a moment. I've also defined some essentially lower level concepts, some sub-concepts, if you like, in our kind of inheritance hierarchy. So I've defined a man and a woman, and I've said that both of these concepts are people in these two sentences here. So I should also say that a CE sentence, much like a natural language sentence, starts with a word and it ends with a full stop. So we know that that is one CE sentence, and this is another CE sentence. Finally, I have conceptualized a company in order to create the company concept in our model, and I've said that that company can have a couple of different properties associated with it as well, in that the company can operate in a country and employ a person. So you can start to see now that we've got multiple different links between the various different concepts that I'm starting to define in the model, in that we have people that can be from a country and work in a particular country, but we've also got companies that operate in the same kind of list of countries that we've already started to define up here. So I'm not going to talk through the rest of this document just yet. What I'm going to do now is copy these model sentences, and I'm going to execute them within the controlled English store that I've got running. And we do that in the accordion panel on the left with the Add CE option. And I'm just going to make this a little bit bigger so the sentences are a little easier to see when I paste them in. It gives you an example sentence just out of the box that there is a person named Fred. We don't need that, so I'm going to write my controlled English over the top. And just to remind you, this is the English that is going to define our ontology or our model to the CE store. And that happens when I click the Save CE Sentences option here. And we can see we've got a little pop up here that tells me that the sentences have loaded into the store. So if I go back to my concepts panel, we can now see that I've got a company concept, a country concept, man, person and woman concepts, in addition to those other default concepts that were already defined in the store. So the list actually contains all of the concept names, and the number in brackets actually represents the number of instances of that concept that we've got defined within the store at the moment. And because all I've done with my conceptualized statements is create the model, I haven't actually created any instances of any of the concepts that I've defined. And so company, country, man, person and woman all have 0 concepts associated with them. Instances associated with those concepts. So if I just click through to talk through what we can see as a result of that execution of the controlled English, we can see that the company is part of a global model. It inherits from the thing object, as I explained at the beginning of the video, and it has a couple of properties that it inherits that we've defined as part of the model definition, but it also inherits a few properties from the thing object as well, the description, related to and same as. And there's some other information in here as well. Similarly, the person concept, you can see, is also part of our global model. It's inheriting from the thing object, but in this case we've got a couple of child concepts, because we said that if you recall in our statements, we said that we can go and conceptualize a man and a woman that is a person. So that is how we do inheritance. And also that we define some properties for that particular concept as well. So if I look at either man or woman, let's choose woman. We can also see here that, again, part of the global model, but this time we're inheriting from both person and thing. So all of the properties that are defined against the woman concept are inherited from both of these two things, these other concepts that we've defined earlier. So we get all of the concepts that we defined manually, as well as the implicit concepts that we get from the thing object. Okay, so that's a little bit of information about creating the model. Next, I'm going to talk about the fact sentences, and that is the sentences that you can see in this next section of my document. So I've said that there is a company named IBM and there is a company named Microsoft, so I've defined explicitly a couple of different companies here, and then I've gone on to talk about the definition of a person. And this one is a little bit more complicated because I've started to define some properties that are associated with that person, as well as defining the definition for that person as well. So I've said that we're defining a person called Graham, and Graham has an email address with this particular string value. Graham is from the country United Kingdom and works for IBM and works in the country United Kingdom. So that will define a whole set of things that have been defined in our conceptualized statement against the instance of the person Graham. So conversely, we can also define another person. I've called this one Dave, and Dave has an email address and he works for a company. So this is just illustrating really that well, a couple of different things. One is that you don't need to define every single property, so there are going to be some gaps in the information that we know about Dave compared to what we could know about Dave that are defined in our model. That's perfectly okay and perfectly valid. And we've also said that Dave, in this case, isn't, well, he is a person, so he's going to inherit the person concept, but we've explicitly said that Dave is a man. So Dave will inherit these properties that I'm defining from the person concept, because we know that a man is a person, so there's that inheritance going on. Okay, so the next sentence just illustrates that I can also define, again, a new company, in this case called Google, and Google employs a person called Sundar. So that, again, illustrates in the same way that I've created these people that you don't need to explicitly define the company in order to define a property against the company. You can define all those things in one long controlled English sentence. And finally, just to illustrate, there's a couple of different ways of writing sentences, particularly for fact sentences. We could say something like the company Microsoft employs the person Satya, as well as the other form of the sentence where I could have said there is a company named Microsoft that employs the person Satya. So there's a couple of different variants in that particular example. So I'm going to, having talked through those, again, copy those from my document and paste them into the CE store via the add CE option. So I'm just going to write those over the top of those sentences that I've already executed. I should just remind you that all of the sentences that I'm adding are additive. So what I'm going to execute now is more information into the CE store. The CE store is going to remember the model sentences that I've already used to create the company and the person concepts, for example. And additionally, what I'm going to do is add these fact sentences into the store. So when I click Save Now, and I go back to the concept panel, we should see that we've got now 3 instances of company. There's one instance of a man. There are 4 person instances. So let's click through those and have a look. So here we can see that we have the 3 companies that I've defined, and we know that Google employs Sundar and Microsoft employs Satya, because those are the pieces of information that we've given to the CE store so far. Similarly, we have 4 people defined. We've got Dave, who is a man, because we explicitly said that Dave was a man concept. And we've got the 3 people, Graham, Satya and Sundar, and we've got the various different properties that we have defined against those people. And again, it's okay to have gaps in our knowledge in CE. That's a perfectly valid thing to do. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is inferencing and rules. So if I go back to my document where I've started to define some controlled English, I have another 2 CE sentences down here. Where I've defined some rules, and this is actually going to help us fill in the gaps in our knowledge. So if we go back to the store for a moment, we know that we have 2 people here, Satya and Sundar, but they don't appear to work for a company, because when we defined those people, we didn't say that they worked for a company. So when we said when we define those 2 people, they're defined explicitly by the fact that we've said that they're employed by a company. So we get the person definition, but we don't get the fact that, or the property for that person that says that they work for a particular company. What we do get is that we know, because of the way that we've written the English, is that there's a company, Google, that employs a person. So when we look at the company instances, that's why we see them here, but we don't see them in the list of person instances. We don't see those properties listed. So we can start to create rules to help with that sort of thing, to fill in those gaps in the knowledge and start to infer relationships that would be kind of implicit for a human to understand. So we have an employee rule that says if we have a person that works for a company, then the company employs the person. And similarly, an employer rule that says if the company employs a person, then the person works for the company. So again, best led by example. If I copy those and add them to the store in the same way I have been doing so far, I shall save those sentences, execute them in the store. And now I have on my right hand side an accordion pane with saved queries and rules. So if I list the 2 rules that I've just defined, the employee and the employer rules, and if we say look at the company instances, and now we should execute the employee rule. What we are expecting to see is that we are going to execute this rule that says if a person works for a company, i.e. if we've got a person instance where we know that that person works for the company, then we can assert the additional fact that the company employs the person. So that's going to essentially fill in this box here where we know that Graham and Dave work for IBM. So let's execute that employee rule now. So the store has told you that it's executed this rule, and these are the results. So the results are that it's actually written a new CE sentence into the store, and it's written the sentence, the company IBM employs the person Graham, and we know that because we have a rationale, again written in terms of controlled English, that the person Graham works for the company IBM, and we have a similar kind of rationale and CE sentence for the person Dave. So now if we go back to our company instances, we see that IBM does indeed now employ both Graham and Dave. Conversely, if we look at our person instances, we've still got Satya and Sundar, who we don't know who they work for if we look at their person instances, but we do know that we've got the information in the store because they're listed under the company instances. So if we also execute the employer rule, we've got 4 sentences that are generated. We can link Sundar to Google, Graham to IBM, Dave to IBM, and Satya to Microsoft. And again, we've got the rationale behind those written in fairly plain English, so that it's very easy for the human to understand what's going on as well. So that means when we go back to our person instances, we can now see that Satya and Sundar both have companies associated with them in terms of who they work for. So I appreciate I've executed those rules manually, but we can get the CE store to execute these sorts of rules automatically, so that whenever any new information is posted into the store, the appropriate rules are run, and it will generate all sorts of new information and do inferences and create new links. So again, that's starting to kind of demonstrate the power of the semantic knowledge graphing kind of technology, where we do have a graph of different things that are all interlinked with each other that we can traverse in a kind of a semantic ontological type way. So finally, we also have the idea of queries, which are very similar to rules, but essentially similar to the way that you might use SQL in a database, actually allow us to query for information in the CE store. So I've got here an employees rule, which says, and I've got a couple of variables C and P, for which company and person is it true that the company C employs the person P, and conversely the other way around, where a person works for a particular company. Again, these are being expressed in terms of that model that we wrote at the beginning of the video. So we're talking about a company, and we defined a company with the ability to employ a person concept. And conversely, we talked about a person working for a particular company concept. So we have a person working for a particular company. So the facts and the rules and the queries all write their English or controlled English in a conformant way to the model that we created. So if I, again, copy those out of my document, add them to the CE store to actually execute those sentences to add them to the store. Now we can see that I have a couple of queries associated with the sentences that I've just run, and I can execute those queries as well. So I can find out, using the employed by rule, who works for which company, and we get the rationale out because we have the CE store working internally using controlled English, so it's able to give us the rationale in a very easily sort of understood fashion. Similarly, the employees rule essentially swaps that round, and it looks at the converse relationship. And again, these are quite powerful and quite simple to update. So if I wanted to created another rule, say employees in country, we could write the person P is from the country C, like so, and again save that into the store, and now I've got a new rule that I can execute, which in this case it doesn't return any results. So let's have a look at what happens if the person is from a particular country. Save that and execute, and now we can see that we have the person Graham working for the company IBM, and we have again the rationale for that. The company IBM employs the person Graham, and the person Graham is from the country United Kingdom, and that is because if we go back to our person instances, the only person for which I've got an is from, or indeed works in, I think I used is from, is Graham. So if I add some more CE in here, which says the person Dave, actually we call him a man, let's call him a man, Dave is from the country United Kingdom. Save that into the store. And now if I go back and look at my person concepts once again, we've got that element of the information displayed, and that means if I execute my query now, I get 2 people come back as a result, because we know that Dave also works in the United Kingdom and is also employed by the company IBM. So again, anything else that I would share is kind of more of the same. We can continue to write controlled English and add more people into the system, and we can continue to write more rules and more queries to make any of the inferencing as complex or as interesting or as flexible as you might want it to be. So I just really want to close out with kind of a reminder that this is exercising REST APIs under the covers. So all of the actions and executions that you've seen during this video have been as a result of API queries using RESTful calls. So it's very much targeted at the developer being able to kind of quickly and easily build up ontological models that are very flexible, they're very additive, and you can sort of change them and can write facts in terms of those models very easily, and do all that via a RESTful manner that is also written in a fairly English-like manner that allows you to give, as you can see on the screen here, fairly clear rationales in a couple of sentences for why things are the way they are in terms of the definition that you have in the store. So in conclusion, thanks very much for listening.